maybe what we should do is just do a quick set of introductions, just so we know who's on the call.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, and I can start. I'm Ashley Balco from the Smalley Bantu Community Association. I think you all know who I am because I've been the one inviting you to participate as advisors for this Commons. So thank you for taking the time. And yeah, I can't see participants. So maybe Ian, do you want to just go through your list of participants and call on people?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just, I'm Ian McSweeney with Agrarian Trust, and I'll just go down the list as I see them. And if, yeah, we could just do a quick introduction, that would be great, and then we'll get going. So Jim Hafner, you're on the top.
Yeah, hi all. I'm Jim Hafner. I'm sitting in Western Massachusetts, Executive Director of Land for Good, and I'm the third stringer representing Abby because she couldn't be here. And Shema's on her way driving to Maine. So I'm glad to be here and listen in. Thanks.
Thank you. And Jonah, you're next.
Hi, everyone. It's Jonah, Cooperative Development Institute in Durham.
Hello. And Bonnie, as listed as Sarah, you're next.
Bonnie Rukin from Slow Money, Maine, calling in from Camden.
Good morning. And Wendy, you're next.
Hi, yeah, I'm Wendy Stevens. I'm sitting in Hillsborough, New Hampshire, and I'm the social media manager for Agrarian Trust. So I'm helping. I thought I was going to help Ian out. I wish I could help more, but it's great to be here.
Thank you. And Ethan, you're next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ethan Miller with Land in Common Community Land Trust, and I'm calling in here from Greene, where I live at Wild Mountain Cooperative.
Welcome. And Francis, you're next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Francis Heens with Bates College and the Good Food Council of Lewiston, Auburn.
Hello. And Jesse, you're next.
Hi, everybody. My name's Jessie Sapphire, and I'm with Land in Common.
Great. And well, next, there's a CLB. Who has that? CL Bestum. Whose tag is that?
I guess we'll figure out who that is at the end if you don't get called.
Right. And let's see, I think there was one more. Oh, Erica, you are next.
Former Vice President of Programs at NFT, now participating as an unaffiliated individual, I guess.
Welcome to your new role.
Thanks. I'm on sabbatical.
Hi, can people hear me now? This is Catherine.
Yeah.
I was struggling with my microphone. Sorry about that. Catherine Besteman. I'm a professor of anthropology at Colby College and wrote a book about the Smalley Bantu community in Lewis.
Great, thank you. And Jason.
Yeah, this is Jason Lilly. I work for the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. I'm based out of the Cumberland County office.
Great, thank you. So I think that's everyone. Did I miss anyone? Okay, well, so I have unmuted everyone. Sorry for the disjointed start, just getting used to this new format, but I've unmuted everyone so everyone is in control of their own mute and talk functions. And please, I don't have the chat question box up all the time, so please interrupt along the way if you have questions. Happy to talk and answer details, and really wanted to leave time at the end for questions and more of an open dialogue. So know that there'll be time then, but if there's pertinent questions along the way, please ask.
And Ian, I can monitor the chat while you're presenting.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Sounds good. So thank you everyone for joining this morning. This was really intended to be kind kind of a community conversation on the recently formed Little Jubba Central Maine Agrarian Commons. And our focus, Ashley and I spent some time on this with the thought that we'd really provide an introduction, a little bit of an overview to the Agrarian Commons that is formed, a little bit of a background overview of agrarian trust and the Agrarian Commons model, and then touch on really where we sit presently with this work and the opportunity we now have. And then really open it up for questions. So we spent a little bit of time getting familiar with the format and brief introduction, but I'll move through fairly quickly so we really have time for open discussion. And at the same time, as I mentioned, please interrupt along the way. So thank you for joining us this morning, and really wanted to start just by acknowledging everything that's going on in the world and the heavy point of crisis and opportunity we're at presently that we see unfolding around the country. So just wanted to give a moment to reflect and a moment of silence for that. So, thank you for joining us. Agrarian Trust, Somali Bantu Community Association, and really all of you on the call as stakeholders have really been dedicated to this work. Most for much longer than I and Agrarian Trust have been involved. So we're grateful for your welcoming us in and for openness to our engagement and collaboration, and really acknowledging that all of you are the local experts and relationships and connections to this work. But really this model and what we're bringing forward, I guess, is our resource and what we wanted to focus on today. So this quote I wanted to start with, this quote was provided by Mohideen. This speaks to kind of the opportunity and the need, and really we'll give you a minute to read it to yourselves, but this is good at framing where we are and really bringing forward the opportunity of a farm acquisition and secure tenure that presents itself now. So as you can read from this quote, there's significant history and really need for long-term secure land tenure in place to build all that this discusses and so much more. So really the catalyst for this Agrarian Commons and our work together is to bring about land ownership, security, and local equity in a farm to provide permanent tenure for all these reasons and more. And so we Somali Bantu Community Association and Agrarian Trust came together to form the Little Jubba Central Maine Agrarian Commons. The Little Jubba Central Maine Agrarian Commons, like other agrarian commons that I'll touch upon, is a 501c2 entity. So there's a specific structure to that, and this diagram illustrates that, in that a 501c2 entity is an affiliate of a C3, a nonprofit. In this case, and in this diagram, Agrarian Trust is the C3 nonprofit entity that co-creates localized C2 landholding commons. And so Agrarian Trust provides some resources, support, and administration. And then this Agrarian Commons, as with others, has its own distinct board that's locally controlled in community and has its own goals around land and really all centered in land, that a 501c2 is solely a land, property, and asset holding affiliate of a C3. So its work is solely to hold land and then convey lease tenure out for use and stewardship on that land. And really, this is all only possible because of the community that we try to represent in this illustration, and recognize that it's much broader than community named, but this is kind of where we're starting from. But this is only possible with a strong community, and only possible with donations and support in to bring this model forward. And the kind of the flow of money and the arrows shown, just for me to provide a brief description, I'll get into a little more detail of this later, but is that Agrarian Trust is a C3, so charitable donations, charitable bargain sales on land, and other transfers come into the Agrarian Trust as a C3 entity. Agrarian Trust then transfers the deed to property and other land assets to the local commons. That transfer is without cost. In doing that, Agrarian Trust retains the role of support in different ways that are needed for that local agrarian commons, and that differs across the commons we're working with. But really, we provide this administrative and kind of supportive roles around technical assistance, legal, financial, network resources for the local commons to hold land. So we're raising capital to acquire that land. We're also raising capital to invest and steward that land, and for long-term endowment and care of land, buildings, and other agrarian assets. The ownership of those are then held in the local commons board, as illustrated here. All decisions for that land are made by that commons board, and they're conveyed out through a long-term lease. In Maine, a 99-year lease is allowed, so that is the structure that we'd use in Maine. And the lease provides autonomy for farmers to operate on the land for agriculture, education, community uses, really any and all active uses of the land that they desire, and active uses of the buildings that they desire as well. As I mentioned, the commons cannot engage in activities. It's just the land holding vehicle, and the trust does not do that either, because the trust does not own the assets and it does not hold the lease. So it is really just the support entity to bring this model about and ensure long-term viability of the model. So the leaseholders have complete autonomy on the land to operate for everything desired and everything touched upon in Mohidan's quote. And that use and those uses of the land are in connection and support and with support by community. So to give a little more detail, this is the Little Jubba Central Maine Agrarian Commons board. At present time, we have a board of 6. We also have legal support from BCM Environmental and Land Law. They helped us in the incorporation of. They're helping us with filing requirements. They're also helping us with real estate transactions. So they're kind of busy in multiple fronts, but really just around the legal requirements to maintain the 501c2 and the kind of acquisition and management of land. And the decision for this Agrarian Commons was to focus on the 5 counties listed. Each Agrarian Commons selects their area of operation locally within their board. So from one commons to the next, it differs quite a bit. But the thought was to focus on these 5 counties. There's not a hard and fast kind of line on the ground where, you know, it can only work within these 5 counties and not able to work without. It's really that we're registered as an entity to operate in Maine, anywhere in Maine. Our focus is on these 5 counties, and our kind of message and really engagement is in these 5 counties. That could change over time. The board as well being 6, that for these agrarian commons, the bylaws allow a board to be as small as state law allows. So state to state that differs. That ranges from 3 to 6 on the small side. So a board can be anywhere from 3 to 6 people depending on state law, and then as large as 18 people. All boards have a breakdown as laid out here, where it's 1/3 farm stakeholders, 1/3 community stakeholders, and 1/3 agrarian trust appointed. And as you can see, the agrarian trust role does not have to be solely agrarian trust staff or board. It's who they are connected with and can appoint in those seats. In the early stages, as we incorporate these entities, it makes a lot of sense for us to be as engaged and as supportive as is needed. So in many, we're holding 2 to 3 seats for that 1/3 breakdown. But here it made a lot of sense. I'm fairly local. I'm not in Maine, but I'm in southern New Hampshire. Ashley, your role in kind of holding both roles and sharing the work of this seat on the board is really invaluable to kind of my time and input of Agrarian Trust, and it's really a beautiful circle in that, what was it, you know, a decade plus ago that we had connected some through work in New Hampshire focused on similar ideals. So to come back around to this in this present work is really a nice connection. So the goals of really this Agrarian Commons and of this land opportunity that I'll get more into later really come down to food security, healthy land management, economic security, community building, cultural preservation and healing. And you can read the rest, and there will be a lot more content we'll be sharing out. This is really an overview of the whole, but wanted to put this forward as that each Agrarian Commons can have its own individual goals, all tied to land tenure, land uses, land stewardship, active agriculture on the land, but they can be really diverse, as you can see here. So that was a brief framing of Little Jubba Central Maine Agrarian Commons. I'll give a little bit of an overview now of Agrarian Trust and the Agrarian Commons model. And then we'll get back more into questions, dialogue, and the opportunity that presents itself now. So we Agrarian Trust are a national land trust supporting land access for next generation farmers. This illustration that depicts the commons and the trust is similar to what I described before and we looked at, but this is more of a general picture of what the model looks like, not localized to Maine, but more just the general picture. So, and our work as Agrarian Trust is really focused, as I said, on supporting next generation farmers, but we feel that all work is central and connected to the land, and land is foundation for all of this work. Anything that happens on, to, with, from the land depends upon who owns the land, who has access to the land, and how that land is stewarded and managed. And that really we need to focus on those questions of who owns the land, who has access to the land. if we're truly going to support next generation farmers, that everything else is built upon that foundation of ownership and access. And the realities is that that's extremely unjust. And I'll touch upon that a little more. But so our work at Agrarian Trust is to support next generation farmers from the foundational work of dealing with an unjust land ownership and access system. So we do this through catalyzing national conversations in different ways. We support networks of stakeholders through different initiatives that I'll briefly touch on, and then creating this Agrarian Commons model and raising the capital to bring it about. So expanding a little bit on that the Agrarian Commons model we'll touch on a little more. Faithlands, Agrarian Legal Support, and Our Land Symposium are all kind of support networks that we have developed to engage communities across the country who are connected to faith, connected or needing legal services, wanting to kind of engage in dialogue, gatherings, symposiums, conferences through the Our Land Symposium. So really bringing about and supporting these stakeholder networks through these initiatives is the way that we feel we can not only actualize the work through the Agrarian Commons model, but also support others who are doing similar. That our kind of goal of success is that we all need to consider and work on a just land ownership and access system. And there's many forms to bring that about. The Agrarian Commons is our form, but that should be, and hopefully is one of 1,000 forms that manifests over the coming years to address these issues. And really, so, you know, our ability to help through legal support, through conversations, and engaging faith communities that own such considerable amounts of land across the country and globe is really critical to this work and really having a broader impact than anything we could do ourselves. So as I said, Agrarian Trust feels that the work to support next generation farmers is based on the land. And we really feel strongly in this quote by Malcolm X, and that this has to be the foundation for everything that happens on the land on up. And we also have to recognize the reality that things are completely unjust in this country. And particular to Maine, that, you know, the people of color in Maine are extremely small percent of the total population, and a great number of those are newer immigrants into the state of Maine. That, you know, so grateful for the Somali Bantu Community Association and others who have moved in to Maine in the last few decades to bring about what little diversity exists in Maine. And really, you know, this is a reality across the country, but it is extremely acute in Maine. In addition, the cost of land continues to accelerate and appreciate across the country, making it extremely unaffordable for farms to acquire and own land, or acquire land and service the debt to own land. That it's, you know, farmland market values are completely out of sync with agricultural production, and it's getting more and more difficult to afford land. And the reality is that international investment vehicles from this country and other places are only accelerating that problem considerably. And really, we're at a crisis point, as these slides point out, a crisis point that sees 37 mid-sized farms a day close, and a crisis point that has farmers among the highest suicide rates in the country. And we're also, again, kind of specific to Maine, the lack of diversity and the age demographics of Maine make this even more extreme. So Agrarian Trust's work across all our platforms, and specific to the Agrarian Commons, is to work within these principles here. And there's a lot of thought and further consideration and kind of articulation of these that are available on our website. I won't get into detail now, just to move things forward to other areas to discuss in this webinar, but all our work is kind of work through the lens of these principles listed here. So we Agrarian Trust, knowing those crisis points that exist, working in the way we do, have come together with these organizations and others to build this Agrarian Commons model to address the issues discussed and to try to support next generation farmers by transforming land ownership, access, and stewardship on the ground. And we've taken inspiration from many of you on this call now lead organizations that are classified under these categories here, and are grateful for your work and your guidance and inspiration and learning for us as we move forward, and really just call these models out as a critically important to be aware of, to learn from, and really to evolve beyond that. Much of this Agrarian Commons model is looking at the fact that community land trusts have a wonderful structure for ownership and equity and access of the land, and yet very few are focused on agriculture. And conservation land trusts have a really robust kind of multi-structured levels of support from regional, statewide to national organizations supporting more localized conservation land trusts that allow really local conservation land trusts to be viable and flourish over time, and have a long history of success and bringing in philanthropic capital and federal money and tax benefits, and a lot of this is not afforded to community land trusts who do critically important work, but do not have these structures of networks and support to support the localized community land trusts. And really, you can see in the history of new communities and the community land trust movement and trustees for reservations and the Forest Society and the conservation land trust movement, there's a real stark difference between the two. And we Agrarian Trust would feel some of that is due to the structures of support and multi-layered entities on different scale that conservation land trusts have that community land trusts don't. And we've been studying for a number of years, and we're really inspired by models throughout Europe that have created community-centered agricultural commons. Tierra des Lignes mentioned here started in 2003. You can see how it's grown to present day, and they were the first in Europe. There's now about 20 or similar organizations throughout Europe doing that work. So really, we see the need and opportunity to do similar here in the United States, and the kind of path to growth that they experienced in France and then throughout Europe is something that we really need to replicate here in the States. So Agrarian Trust is creating multiple 501c2, 501c25 Agrarian Commons across the country for these reasons mentioned here. And so this is back to the diagram I showed before of the Agrarian Commons, also to kind of highlight the conservation land trust, community land trusts, and agrarian trusts, and really that what we are doing with the Agrarian Commons is trying to learn from and benefit from the work of both conservation and community land trusts, and create a hybrid that's focused on agriculture in community. So, and this gives a little more detail on different aspects of the Agrarian Commons and how it is distinct from conservation and community land trusts. And as I mentioned, so we, Agrarian Trust, are the single 501c3 entity. There is one example of a C25. I'll leave that off for now, but just mention that has multiple 501c3 parents to it. And we do have a 501c25 Agrarian Commons in Montana with multiple, a statewide community land trust, and a organic kind of stewardship focused soil building farm and educational center are the three parents of that Agrarian Commons, the three C3s that form that C25. But really the C3 is single agrarian trust. For all the C2s, that's a structural requirement of IRS and the entity itself. And then the C3 is just providing guidance, support, and assistance, and the land holding, self-determination, equity, all that is held at the local C2 level. And there are multiple C2s, so they have local identity to place, and they're focused on a specific region. So as of May 1, we incorporated 10 local agrarian commons across the country, working with 12 and now 13 farms that are coming into ownership by those agrarian commons, and those farms kind of represent the further impact I described there. So, and this is the location where they are. The circles represent kind of their approximate size. It's not intended to be accurate to their specific size decided upon, but as you can see, some have elected to be very local and smaller in geographic size, and some are quite a bit larger, and all that was individually decided by each local agrarian commons. And I bring up this map and toggle between the two for a minute to this map. The dark green highlights the areas of good farmland soils. The dark red highlights areas of high development pressure. This was created by American Farmland Trust. As you can see, areas that have dark green and dark red together are at great risk for loss of farmland. As you can see, there's a lot of this across the country. And as you can see, toggling back, that a number of the agrarian commons are focused just in those areas where there's development pressure and land speculation, land extraction, land development risk at play, that makes it even more difficult for farmers to afford, get on, and secure tenure to land, and the loss of farmland to extraction development that much more significant. So our work is really to work nationally and to recognize that there's a lot of need that exists in areas that have little attention paid by land trusts in general to the work, and little attention paid by USDA funds, by private donation funds, just by, in general, farmland conservation, farmland trust work. So our job is to work across the country, focusing in areas where others are not, to bring about this model and to collaborate and bring this innovation to areas where there's already robust partnerships and a lot of work happening, as is Maine, but really this model kind of innovates and allows collaboration beyond what exists. So overall, the Agrarian Commons model is set about to bring about these priorities listed here. So as you can see, it's really land-based. The Agrarian Commons model and the C2 structure is limited in scope as an entity to really just holding the land, but in holding the land and conveying equity in a new way, much of this work and goals can be pursued and achieved, and it that much more difficult if we do not focus on land ownership and tenure. So, and just to highlight kind of some of the collaboration, I wanted to put this in that, you know, this kind of calls for the different farms and agrarian commons, but, and just one partner in USDA and their different programs. But, you know, a number of the commons we're working with have long been partners with USDA in different programs. A number of the farms have collaboration with USDA through their cost share programs, are protected by conservation easements, are also in process of being protected by conservation easements. That there's several farm projects that the conservation easement acquisition happening at time of our transaction to bring the fee ownership of the farm into the commons makes it that much more viable, because that's part of the funding picture that brings forward a great collaboration, both of a conservation land trust that's local to that region and of USDA as a partner as well. And the fact that we agrarian trusts are doing this across the country and all having kind of a shared structure and aligned goals in the commons, there's opportunity for further engagement. So this slide was developed just a week and a half ago. I gave a presentation to USDA staff and had just over 200 staff from across the country from USDA tune in to hear about the Agrarian Commons and really learn about the collaborations that already exist and explore ways to further those collaborations. And you know, they're working on a national level. They're working on kind of a need to think about scale and broader impact. So the ability to think about working with a whole commons or a number of commons within a USDA defined region is really of interest to them, to bring about some of these programs and other programs they have to support the commons in the ways they can bring support and funding forward. So that's it for this presentation. I did now want to talk a little bit about the opportunity that we have now and the work we're doing, but also wanted to pause for a minute to answer any questions that there might be on what was presented.
This is Catherine. Can you hear me? I've got a quick question.
Yes. Yep.
Could you explain a little bit about what the obligations and responsibilities are of the organizations that that receive leases from you? I expect they're nonprofit. Do they have financial obligations? Do they have a set of rules they're required to conform to? You know, what specifically are the expectations that the Agrarian Trust obligates of them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So right. I'll thank you for that question. I'll use that opportunity to kind of dig a little more into a broad picture of that lease relationship and hopefully answer the question in doing that. But so the lease relationship between a local agrarian commons and the leaseholder is fairly similar across all farms and agrarian commons, in that we Agrarian Trust have developed a template lease document that is intended to be the starting point for all lease agreements. That was developed really from looking around and finding best practice lease examples that exist from different organizations across the country. We then used, and this was for lease, the bylaws, articles of incorporation, other standards documents we're using for this model, but to kind of take the best practice we could find. And then we worked through 2 committees over a year and a half's time to really workshop those documents and get broad input. The first committee was made up of attorneys and practitioners. Some of you who are on this webinar now were part of that. practitioners from nonprofits to stakeholders, other organizations in conservation, agriculture, land tenure work around the country. And then the second committee was specific to those 10 agrarian commons and the local stakeholders involved in those agrarian commons as they were initially forming. So each of those agrarian commons has grown in their community and stakeholders. So the second committee did not include everyone currently involved. It was more the initial cohort, but both of those committees provided input in to create these template documents we have. And really the template lease document speaks to a variety of things. And some of those in the template are things that we Agrarian Trust require. And those requirements are to fulfill the principles I brought forward before. So we require long-term tenure. Length of lease differs state to state, and who can be leaseor and leasee differs state to state as well, from a range of 99-year rolling lease to any type of leasee party and leaseor party, to some states that only have a 15-year lease term and are in state law prohibit kind of a nonprofit ownership or lease holding, except for some exceptions. So we've had to dig into some legal work in Minnesota, for example, to find a workaround for the corporate farm law that exists there that prohibits nonprofit ownership or leaseholding tenure. But really, it's a lease is conveying long-term secure lease that's transferable and conveyable. So leaseholder can farm as long as they want. They can then pass that to their children. They can pass that to someone else. They can sell that to someone else. They're also equity building. So equity building might be what's called a ground lease, where leasee, anything they invest to build a house, farm infrastructure, any buildings, infrastructure, or other investments they invest in on the ground are their ownership, and they have the equity in those. To other cases where the leasees don't want that or really can't afford that, for in a New England context, a dairy farm, the land is unaffordable and the infrastructure is unaffordable, and we're losing dairy farms daily. And the reality is that, thinking land and infrastructure is affordable is going to be the demise of the dairy industry, in my opinion here. So we need a new model, and a ground lease isn't going to work for a dairy farm because the infrastructure is still unaffordable. So some farms, it's just unaffordable or don't want to own all those land, those kind of buildings, infrastructure that are on the land. So they're renting those. But other kind of equity components would be their stewardship of the soils, their community engagement, their food production components. So there's different kind of ways in which their activities can build equity, and equity being financial equity is what I'm talking about right now. So their time spent on these activities are accruing financial equity that when they exit the lease, they can capture that equity in the transfer out. Other components to the lease is that our focus is on Agrarian Trust focus, and thus all these commons focus is on chemical-free, diversified food production agriculture that's connected to community. Community connection could manifest in multiple different ways, from a CSA to workshops to engagement with local school, or, there's multiple ways community engagement can take place. We don't stipulate which one, but they're all all farms have to be chemical-free food production, regenerative agriculture with some components around community engagement. Leaseholders also have to kind of maintain the property. So they're holding the property taxes and property insurance responsibilities. and then the maintenance of the property. Now those maintenance of the property and other expenses differs from one commons to the next, but part of agrarian trust work and raising capital towards the acquisition is to raise capital for long-term endowments for the land, the buildings, and for kind of a reserves for those insurance and property tax and other things. So where needed, supporting those aspects as well is critically important to us. And really the C2 structure allows more flexibility around flexibility of lease rate and lease terms that really attracted us, Agrarian Trust, to use the C2 structure. So some equity could, from activities I described, could look like accruing a financial account for when farmer exits. Other equity could look like a low or no cost lease payment. And the C2 is a lot more flexible around allowing that than a C3 would be by law. So those are some of the kind of considerations of the lease. Leaseholder has property for the term of the lease. So long as they don't violate those terms, they're working autonomously on the ground. There's a responsibility for a yearly check-in with the leaseholder and the Agrarian Commons specific to that property. Keep in mind that each Agrarian Commons, a third of the board is made up of the leaseholders. So the leaseholders on those farms have a direct seat and voice as part of that commons. So it's intended to be a true commons where those that are using the land are making decisions on the management of that land and other lands that might be held in that commons as well. So those are kind of some of the general requirements of the lease. We are one of our, or two of our principles, one the commons and one transparency, that really all of this work that we are doing, we intend for it to be completely transparent and a commons-based resource for others to learn from. Presently, the work of those committees that I mentioned, Vermont Law School's been involved in those committees. They have a summer project going on now to compile the work of those two committees into a publication, both of all the template documents, but also the questions raised, the items brought forward but not included in the templates, the partners involved and the other work they're doing. So when that work from Vermont Law School is done, that will be available as an open source resource for all. We're also on the Agrarian Commons website for each Agrarian Commons, have tabs right now that are not linked to anything, but will be as we finalize these. So each bylaws for each common, each articles of incorporation, each lease document will all be linked and available for an open source resource for others to look at. So it's all transparent and available for anyone to look at. I'm happy to share those out now with people. We just don't have them up for public view yet because of this work with Vermont Law School to kind of clean them up and bring them into kind of a published format. For the leases, though, really the other component is that Agrarian Trust feels this model is really important for many different types of structures across the country. So leaseholders, in this case that we're talking about now, is a nonprofit, the Somali Bantu Community Association. In many other cases, it's not. It's for-profit farms. In one case, it's a county, Fayette County in West Virginia. So there's different leaseholders at play, and all are doing kind of the types of agriculture and community engagement described, but really a leaseholder could be a for-profit business, it could be a cooperative, it could be a nonprofit, it could be a governmental agency, or or there could be multiple leaseholders on one parcel of land as well. So it really differs by farm and by agrarian commons. And that's also the intent, to really create a diverse model that works for many different leaseholders, farms, and communities.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So any other questions?
Yes, this is Bonnie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Even though it says Sarah Miller, my daughter. I am obviously very supportive of this project, and I'm aware of challenges a little bit when I share it as a new concept with others related to racial justice. So you cited earlier that 98% of farmland is owned by white people who are not farmers, and that's probably true in this case of Agrarian Trust.
Correct. Yeah.
So I just want to get a sense from you about how you share that. And I'm curious to know if this particular project in Maine is your first with people of color, and just how that all fits into your thinking and your practice.
Yeah. So right, Agrarian Trust is a newer nonprofit, started in 2013. It was founded and started by Greenhorns and the Schumacher Center. Both of those organizations and Agrarian Trust were founded as white-led nonprofits. They're founded on Agrarian Trust is founded on this inspiration of the commons, and believe strongly in the work of the commons that is really something that takes place across the world, in the global south in a lot of places, in Europe, in other parts of the world, less so here. The most notable example of kind of study of the commons here was by a woman, Eleanor Ostrom, who was the only woman to win Nobel Prize in Economics for studying the commons. So we are rooted in a real female-led presence, and I say that knowing that I am a white male leading the organization. But if you go onto our organization and look at our team page, you'll see that it is predominantly, almost exclusively female-led, and I would tell you that 2.5 years ago, we had a staff of 3 people, and we now have the staff depicted there. And as you can see, there is more diversity, and our goal is to continue to grow into that diversity, but it's a work in progress. But that is our focus as an organization, and really, as an organization, we want these initiatives like the Agrarian Commons to then seed our future growth of board and staff. So we want kind of the localized work to then expand our organization. So you'll see as our organization grows over time, it's bringing people forward who are part of each or some of these Agrarian Commons into roles of board, advisor, staff of Agrarian Trust. And that is intentional to kind of have that growth come from the bottom up from each of these commons. So to the commons, right, that a couple things to bring forward. One is that I speak of in this presentation and other times the gross inequities of land ownership, and it's over 98% of land is owned by white Americans, primarily of European descent, and recognize that we are a white nonprofit, and this structure is nonprofit ownership of land. With that recognition, I share that we Agrarian Trust do not feel and do not want to and are not owning land in this structure. Land is owned in each local Agrarian Commons. So while this structure brings land into nonprofit ownership, it's nonprofit in these community Agrarian Commons. So the equity, decision-making, and autonomy for that land is held local in an Agrarian Commons. And that Agrarian Commons has the control. So it's not being held with us as an organization. We're the supportive entity. specific to the diversity across the commons. On our Commons website, you'll see on the homepage, there's a few demographics brought forward, and you'll see that the boards of an aggregate of the commons are majority women-led, and there is some diversity on those boards, not as much as we want, but that's where we're starting from. Little Jubba Agrarian Commons presently is our only agrarian commons that is majority led by people of color. We have 2 other agrarian commons that are in formation now that will be coming online in the next few months to prior to the end of this year, that also fit into that category. One is in Richmond, Virginia, that is an all Black farmer-led agrarian commons, and one is in the Potomac region of Virginia as well. And again, that one's more of a mix of people involved, but it has great diversity as well. I'd share that, you know, our intention is to bring about a lot more diversity, and at the same time, our intention is to do it in an impactful and equity building way, that we do not want to grow our organization, the trust, or any of the commons by just having a diverse board, say, or staff that are not stakeholders and do not hold equity. So it's really important for us to, as in Maine and as in these other developing agrarian commons that I mentioned, that when there's people of color brought onto an agrarian commons, it is because that agrarian commons is led by them, and the land work that is being brought forward is to bring about land security for that community. It is not to tokenize someone and bring them on to claim diversity without giving them equity. So it's a slow process, and we could desire that things move quicker, but they do not, and the intention is to kind of bring about this diversity, and I encourage kind of, you know, us to hold the Little Jubba Agrarian Commons up as a model of what could be. I also to look at these forming agrarian commons in Virginia that will come online in the next few months as other real powerful examples of the work needed.
Thank you.
This is and I see that you guys do have a relationship with the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust also, don't you?
Yeah, so right. The other component is, and really, so the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust has been a part of these committees that I mentioned earlier. They are actually, from that committee work and other collaboration with them, their structural land ownership model is replicating this C3, C2 structure. And yeah, so we work in close partnership with them in different ways. We're also a member of the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance and partner with them in different ways. One way is the Washington Agrarian Commons, for example. While it is white-led now, they already have ownership of farmland, and we're partnering with 2 organizations, Viva Farms and Communities to Communities there, that are both U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance partners that are training really Central and South American farm workers around building individual enterprises and building equity in the food system. And the land ownership we have there is going to provide a land base for those organizations. The Minnesota Agrarian Commons is an all-white-led agrarian commons, but that is centered around the work of the Main Street Project. The Main Street Project is a nonprofit that provides training, outreach, and kind of farm enterprise building around small-scale poultry operations for Central and South American farm workers as well. And that is their work, and that is the land base we're working with there. We're actually also working in partnership with a newer, first of its kind agricultural community land trust that was just founded and received its C3 status 3 months ago in Puerto Rico. And we're collaborating with them to co-learn really as they move forward to develop a similar C3, C2 structure and bring land ownership into their holdings there as well. So there's other collaborations and partnerships we're involved in that we're honored to be part of. They're not our work though, they're not our stories to tell, and yet at the same time we're a part of them. And this model is inspiring their work and really being replicated and evolved by them as well.
Hey, this is Ashley. I just want to say I really appreciate these questions and Ian for answering them. And I just wanted to ask you, Ian, while we're on this topic or similar topic, how has the organization talked about Indigenous sovereignty and land sovereignty and promoting that conceptually?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so a couple items. So one, our bylaws, Agrarian Trust bylaws, and carried forward to the Agrarian Commons bylaws is that, all C3 land trusts kind of have a plan either in their bylaws or kind of by default from the state attorney general's office that if they fail and cease to exist, where those assets go. So our bylaws speak to our assets would go to Indigenous community or communities of color as a priority above other kind of nonprofit land trusts, say. So that's just one component, and that's really not an action that does anything unless we fail, right? And our goal is not to fail. So it really has minimal impact, but it is language that's important because many don't consider that, and many just perpetuate kind of white nonprofit control of assets. So we're wanting to seed those where we can. The other component, we have of the Agrarian Commons board members, we have 2 board members who are of Indigenous descent and are both lawyers. So it's a real benefit to kind of have them involved in the conversations and some of this committee work and developing kind of how we can kind of engage Indigenous communities in a real and impactful way. And so one thing we're doing that many are doing now, and it's a step, and it's not a solution, and it's not impact in and of itself, but it is a step, is really acknowledging the land we're on as step number 1. Step number 2 is that any land we take in once and immediately once we take ownership of that, we're setting up some type of either some reparations, direct payment to an Indigenous community that exists there. So if you go on our Washington Agrarian Commons page, you'll see highlight of that because that's the farms we own now. And so that relationship and contribution on a monthly basis is provided to an Indigenous community there. The other is working back to kind of Northeast farmers of color. And there's also been others in the Northeast that have worked on cultural respect easements. And in all of our commons, we speak to the ability to convey cultural respect easements on land. And the difficult part of that is having a receiving community who's ready, and we have trust and relationship to kind of move forward in that way. But that is our intent, that that across all commons that land is made available through lease tenure, but also through cultural respect easements for Indigenous communities.
Thanks, Ian.
You're welcome. So other questions?
This is Jason. I am wondering, where does the project stand as far as support for the Somali Bantu Community Association, and what are some of the next steps and things that need to be done in order to help this group get on some land?
Yeah, great. Thank you for the segue. And if there's no other questions, I'll move to that aspect.
I just had maybe a question more broadly about Agrarian Trust first, if you want to take that before moving to that, but either way it works.
Sure, yeah. If that's, sorry to put your question on hold for a minute, Jason, but if we could, answer your question,
So
Jonah,
I'm
and
just,
then shift.
Yeah, just wondering kind of in a broader sense, like where, like, so I know you're working to acquire a lot of land throughout the country, and I know that takes a lot of money, and I'm just kind of wondering where is Agrarian Trust getting that money, and like, and what terms or conditions is that money coming into Agrarian Trust to then acquire land?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So right. So of these 13 farms and the creation of these 10 agrarian commons, excuse me, the acquisition of that land, the investment in kind of infrastructure, improving soils and other things to really make the land a more healthy ecosystem if needed, and a more viable agricultural productions if needed, and then to set up and support these agrarian commons, and then to also set up the kind of stewardship and capital endowments as mentioned. Really, those are the areas that need money in total. Of these 10 agrarian commons and the 13 farms, that equates to a little less than $10 million in total needed. And we have on our website, and we just shared out kind of an overview of that campaign, and really our big picture kind of funding need, and to get at answering your question, Jonah, is that our work at Agrarian Trust to date has been to kind of develop these relationships, develop and incorporate these agrarian commons, secure agreements for these now 13 farms to acquire them, and understand those kind of investment and endowment needs for them, so we could understand a total cost for the whole. A number of these farms that we've kind of been in discussions with for some time. We've kind of progressed in that really on the individual lead funder side. So 10 million is needed in total. A number of these farms have kind of lead funders committed already for 30 to 40 to 50% of the acquisition costs needed. So, some of that 10 million is already secured towards specific farms. And we're still kind of the more recent farm agreements that we have don't yet have that kind of initial funding pool in place. So we're kind of in that stage of securing the additional lead funding for the more recent committed to farms that do not have that yet lead funder commitments in. Then with all those kind of lead funding in a more quiet and direct relationship work, we'll then launch forward a public fundraising campaign, and the public fundraising campaign will be philanthropic capital and investment capital in, and both from really it's all private funding from foundations, high net worth individuals, and from community at large. And both on the investment side is low interest aligned capital partners investing in, and low interest connected community members in. So in that part of our work, the last stage of the fundraising towards this bigger picture is that of those 13 farms in, a number of the farms that are long-standing farms. So back to that kind of diversity of leaseholders, it's really diversity of farms as well. So a number of farms are mid-career farms who they own the farm, they own the business. This model, they're transferring the farm into a commons, holding the business. Other farms have been kind of generation or multi-generation farms where a farmer is exiting and new farmer opportunities are opening up. But in those mid-career farms and kind of generation or multi-generation farm, all of those are long-standing CSA farms. They're the type of farm I was describing, and those long-standing CSAs have communities involved. So what I've done with other work in the past, my past role before Agrarian Trust, I ran a private foundation, the Russell Foundation, and did land transaction, land conservation work, and fundraising work, in addition to kind of managing an internal grant fund that we had. But some of those projects were engaging long-standing CSA communities to engage their membership more deeply around land security. So of these in Agrarian Trusts and this commons work, of those existing and exiting farms, they have a combined aggregate kind of CSA community, a social media aggregate of 190,000 people across the country, and a kind of CSA member, market-based member, newsletter membership of about 100,000 people. So engaging those direct communities as donors and investors into this model as a community-supported land tenure model, which is really kind of where we need to go for many reasons. One, that CSA movement has shown considerable growth from, the modern European-led CSA movement has shown considerable growth from 1984 to present. And yet the founders of that movement never had land security. And so the reality is land security has to be part of the CSA cultures and support of the farms. And there was just an article written in Mother Earth News highlighting the Agrarian Commons model as kind of expansion of the CSA movement. And that's exactly what part of the fundraising will be. So it's, the lead fundraising in from the sources described, then kind of foundation, high net worth individual engagement around kind of the mid fundraising stage, and then the final fundraising is out to the communities at large. And in partnership, kind of, I also mentioned that, that anywhere we can, we're partnering for conservation easements or other types of collaborations that can bring capital forward as well. The conservation easement partnerships are really, that's the only grant money that's coming in with strings attached, in that, it's coming in to acquire a conservation easement. Those conservation easements then have, requirements for them. The investment capital is coming in with strings attached as its investment capital, but it's long-term patient capital. We limit the amount of that, and only a small portion is allowed to use the land as collateral. So we're not risking the land security with this investment capital, and we're not burdening the farms with high interest rate or extractive based debt. So it's really bringing in capital that's supportive and aligned in this model without kind of a lot of strings attached to it. And it also shared that the 10 million needed to acquire the land and invest in this way represents farms that have a $16.5 million market value. So there's also a number of farm donations that are coming in, and really all but one or two of the farm transactions have considerable bargain sale discounts involved as well. So, the present landowners of these are all contributing and either donating in, and that's from private landowners, farm landowners who are non-farmers with some wealth, to community land trusts who own farms and also own affordable housing, and they're donating the farms in, to a community land trust that's a land bank for city, and so the city's land bank land that comes in kind of captured by the city then is donated into this land bank and then moves into this structure. So there's a variety of kind of ways that land flows into this, but it all has landowner donation as a component to it, and then has very friendly and predominantly philanthropic capital to make the model work. And really the campaign overall is a 2-year period. Some projects have a shorter time frame to raise the capital needed to acquire the land, but many have kind of a 2-year or longer window to raise that capital. So we're just May 1 stepping into that campaign forward. So this is the period of time to do that.
Hey, this is Ashley. I just wanted to give you a time check, Ian, so that we can talk about, I feel like it's probably a good transition point into talking about the land for SBCA. And I'll also note for folks who do have to jump off, if we do run over, I'm happy to just send me any questions you have and I will answer them if I can, or have Ian give you a comprehensive answer to those questions.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. And I'd also add too that we will, I'm sorry, I should have shared before, but we're recording this, and our intention was to share this recording out. I sorry I didn't open with that, but if anyone would prefer this is not recorded, we're also happy to honor that. And sorry for not bringing that forward to start the presentation, but the intention was to make this available as a resource for all of you and others as well.
Thanks, Ian. I did let everyone know via email that we're recording, but again, if you're not comfortable with the recording being shared, then just send me an email.
Great, thanks. So yeah, to move quickly, and so this is very recent. So was intending to put together some slides for this, but didn't get to it. So we'll just talk through this, but really we will be sharing forward content on this with all of you in the very near future. And we'll have a lot more content than could be shared in a slide or two to share forward as well, but to just kind of talk through present opportunity and farm and kind of next steps forward. So we, as of yesterday, have a signed purchase agreement where Agrarian Trust is the buyer, as this model describes. Agrarian Trust acquires, transfers without cost to the Agrarian Commons. So Agrarian Commons, as the buyer, is committed to acquire a 107 plus or minus acre certified organic farm in Wales, Maine on Gardner Road. This farm is something that was brought forward by those of you on the call and really who have been long supporting SBCA in the land search process. Found a wonderful opportunity in Wales, Maine, so close to downtown Lewiston, an acreage that's considerable. There's about 60 to 65 acres of open land that's presently in organic hay production. That is, it's a long rectangular piece. So there's a field closer to the road and then a field further back from the road with some surrounding forest land that gives it some privacy and some protection for all the uses described during this presentation and that you're all aware of. The farm has a house, it has a workshop and several barns. All is in good shape and well cared for, and a really kind of caring present landowner who in kind of initial conversations with those of you who are on a site walk had mentioned that their interest and support of this sale, and that they too were once new to Maine and recognize immigrants coming into Maine as important too. They also just recognized, as the husband of this family was anticipating and hoping for this sale, went up to clean the chimneys out and noticed that the roof was beginning to age, so they're having a new roof put on the house now, and not increasing cost or anything in that, but simply wanting to pass the property on in as good a shape as possible. So we have a purchase agreement. We have contingencies in place around everything you'd expect around inspections and review and appraisal and such. So those are moving forward now and will take place over the next few weeks. And really, if anything comes up there, we have the opportunity to step out of the agreement without any loss of deposit money and only loss of time and kind of due diligence costs put in. But so we have security towards the purchase. The landowner is also willing to provide a seller financed 50% of the purchase price over several years post acquisition. The purchase lays out a beginning of December acquisition of the property. And so we need to raise half the money for the purchase, and then the kind of project costs and the stewardship and capital endowments, as I mentioned before, are the other costs needed up front. So if we raise that money by December, and all this due diligence work turns out to prove that the property has no issues that are concerning to us, a purchase would take place beginning of December, and then SBCA would immediately, at time of that purchase, acquire a 99-year lease to the property, and immediately at that purchase, the Little Jubba Agrarian Commons would take transfer of that property. So they would be the owner in middle of December, and Somali Bantu Community Association will be the long-term leaseholder beginning of December going forward as well. So really, the work ahead there is to carry forward these due diligence steps that really right now Ashley and I are holding, and Ashley's pulling at others where needed for help with those steps, and grateful for those that are supporting and helping with that work. And then it'll be really sharing the word out of this project, engaging others as interested parties and supporters around the fundraising project. Additionally, the land is not under a conservation easement now. We've been in discussions since initially looking at the land with MFT around a conservation easement on the land, and the appraisal that's being done now is both for Agrarian Trust needs around purchase of the whole property, and for MFT needs around value of a conservation easement on the property as well. So we'd move forward with a conservation easement that could be part of protection of the land, bringing in a partnership of Maine Farmland Trust in that role, and also bringing forward some of the capital needed towards the acquisition. And then really need to raise philanthropic capital for the rest, and are engaged in a number of conversations already towards that, and really would welcome any kind of shared conversations, introductions, support on that work that any of you may have. And we should have by beginning of this coming week kind of a finalized overview summary that we can share out with all of you, that kind of, it's fairly comprehensive, and many of you may not need the whole summary, and we'll pull it apart into pieces as well, but it gives kind of an overview of what we talked about now, and SBCA and AT, and then really the funding and the land details as well, and how to engage.
Hey, Ian, this is Jim. Oops, sorry. Ian, this is Jim. Hey, how do you set the endowment funds kind of target, component of the, the overall goal? Like, how do you just, decide what is a meaningful endowment amount, and what are the parameters for that, for, using this property as an example?
Yeah. Well, so in general, how we set that is by really property and building inspection work that's done as part of the due diligence, and asking those inspectors to really, look at the age and maintenance cost of systems, and major costs of buildings infrastructure, and then having an understanding through environmental assessment of the condition of land. And so specific to this property, we haven't done those yet. We have those contracted to take place over the next few weeks, but the kind of the costs we've built in for those are based on other building and environmental inspections we've had for other properties that have kind of similar number of buildings and square footage and age of buildings and such. So we may adjust that slightly from the numbers we're using now based on the inspection, but it's really based on those kind of those knowledgeable experts who are going to come in and look at the age and maintenance needs of buildings, and then kind of the condition and kind of soil health of the property, and then kind of reaching out to other partners we have who are engaged in property management, to soil regeneration, to kind of habitat improvement, to things like that, to kind of build out costs accordingly.
So, okay, so just for my clarification, so that I guess I'm probing the endowment piece of it as well. So is it operate as an endowment, or is it an initial, like, or are there going to be additional, stewardship costs that are part of the carrying costs for the commons? It's not an endowment that throws off resources enough to cover those in, for the term of the lease or for some longer term. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at as well.
Yeah, so it's set up as a pure endowment, solely restricted for uses solely for these kind of capital maintenance needs of buildings infrastructure, or for kind of on the land side for kind of degradation that might happen to the land, during the use of the land and repair of that. And the, the interest earned on that is just.
Hey, everybody. I actually have to hop off here in a minute anyways. But thank you so much for all of this. It's been incredibly insightful, and I'm really, really pleased and excited to hear about the purchase agreement too. That's just fantastic.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks so much for joining. And yeah, I was gonna mention to folks, but I'll say an email. I think we're gonna try to connect with media, around this. And I think I've asked everyone, and I think you've said yes, but I am going to list all of, the members' names and affiliations. So,
They go for it. That's great.
great.
And more broadly, just I stand ready and to pitch in whatever ways would be helpful going forward.
Thanks. That's awesome. And if you do need any clarification on anything, feel free to send me an email.
Will do.
I know we've been saying we'll connect for a while, and
we'll get there. There's a lot of moving pieces on
Yeah.
your end and my end, so I get it.
yeah, cool. All right. Thanks, Francis.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. And I'm gonna hop off, but yeah, I'll keep my eye on next steps that are coming up.
Great,
Sounds
thank
good.
you.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Sure. Thanks for joining.
Yeah.